We need assets to move this airline forward, and right now you are acting like a liability." These words would haunt Minnie, a young flight attendant at a small airline. She was just about to make it big. "Mine thought he needs some water." Little does she know, her helping hand will cost her more than she ever imagined. Minnie ran her fingers over her red skirt, making sure her uniform was spotless. As she grabbed a few bottles of water and hurried down the narrow airplane aisle thousands of feet above the ground, she hoped to escape the unfortunate reality that awaited her back in her small one-bedroom apartment on the city's south side. In the back of her mind, she knew the bills at home were piling up. The insurance company never missed a beat when it came to taking more money. She felt like she could escape into the clouds and surround herself with people from all over the world when she put on her uniform and grabbed the small carry-on bag. She had a fascination with airports and the people who boarded planes at the oddest hours, some to reunite with their families after what seemed like years, while others were on their honeymoons, and some were packing up all the gossip to attend their high school reunions. If you keep daydreaming, John will never let you work in business class. Her coworker, Naomi, was determined to get her to work in business class. People talked about the opportunities that came with being in business class. The rich and powerful would give their business cards to the flight attendants and the workers, and from there, it was a ticket into the world of the rich and famous. Minnie had her reservations. She had gotten used to the economy class passengers. It seemed to her that for all their struggles at home, the lack of legs, space, and refreshments, they still seemed content with the tiny screens in front of them. Minnie made her way down the narrow economy aisle, balancing a tray of water bottles, a thin curtain separating her world from the tantalizing scent of expensive perfume wafting from business class. She paused for a moment, lost in thought. Was it worth sacrificing the simple pleasures she found in economy, the shared stories, the playful children, the heartfelt conversations of couples reminiscing about their first encounters, for the exclusivity that lay just behind that curtain? Minnie was suddenly jolted from her daydream by the sound of an elderly woman in the cramped seat across from her. "Oh, my dear, don't you have striking eyes?" Minnie smiled before she could even thank the old woman. The woman spoke again. "Could you do me a favor, darling?" Minnie knew that if her boss, John, saw her lingering over a passenger for too long without doing anything, he would get angry. She could lose her business class ticket, and her bills would go unpaid. But as she stared into the older woman's eyes, she could not just say no. She thought about how her mother had raised her and taught her to never be afraid to help others. Without another thought, she walked over to the old woman and spoke softly. "Of course, what can I do for you?" "Well, I know this is a lot to ask, but could you please check on my son? He's just behind the curtain, a few seats away in the shop." Minnie nodded immediately. She asked for his seat number, and when she had it, she quietly made her way to the business class section behind the curtain. Just as she reached the seat, she turned to face the middle-aged man. He seemed to be breathing heavily. His eyes darted around the plane. As soon as he saw her, he began to speak in a hurried tone, his words tripping over each other. "Oh, thank God. I have been calling for someone to help me for a while now." Minnie replied immediately. "I'm so sorry. I came as soon as I could. Your mother asked me to check on you." The man continued with a note of concern in his voice. "Listen, I tried to get us seats together, but everything was booked. The airline wouldn't even give me a last-minute upgrade for her, and they said we couldn't switch seats because of their strict policy. My mom is terrified of flying, and I'm worried sick about her being back there on her own. She has this medallion. It was her sister's medallion, and it always calms her down. Would you take it to her? I know it's a lot to ask, but I would be so grateful." Just as Minnie reached forward to grab the necklace from the man in the suit, her eyes locked with her angry boss, John. He was already charging toward Minnie. She felt her heart skip a beat in her chest. She could hear John's words attacking her from a few feet away. "Minnie, you seem to have forgotten that you are supposed to stay in the business section. You seem to be acting completely unprofessionally and are too eager to get things you don't deserve." Minnie held back her tears. She knew that when it came to her stubborn boss, there was no way he was going to understand that she did not want to have anything to do with the business class. She just wanted to help an old woman who had been separated from her son. John gestured angrily at Minnie. But before he could utter a word, an announcement filled the airplane. Minnie grabbed the small curtain next to her. John grabbed the seat next to him as the co-pilot's voice rang in their ears. He had told everyone to stay in their seats. They were about to experience turbulence. As soon as the announcement was over, John continued with Minnie. "You better get to the back of the plane and stay there until the end of the flight if you want to save your future with this company. I've reassigned you to sorting garbage and supplies, as you have proven yourself unworthy of handling passengers in a professional manner at this time." Minnie had to make a choice. She could either listen to her boss and forget about the old lady and her son, or she could stop herself from shying away from a good deed and deal with the consequences. Later, she turned to John, her voice shaking slightly. "I understand your disappointment, John, and I accept the consequences," Minnie said, her voice more stable now. "But before I go, there's one more thing I need to do." John raised an eyebrow at Minnie as he watched her rush down the aisle with a silver pendant hanging between her fingers. This infuriated him. He had made up his mind to fire her. As soon as they landed, Minnie was out of breath. The plane hit turbulence, and she immediately saw the old woman. The old woman, clutching her chest with a look of sheer panic, grabbed the seat in front of her and squeezed her eyes shut. Minnie struggled to keep her balance as the plane moved. She quickly dropped to her knees and lowered her voice as she reached for the old woman's hand and spoke. "Ma'am, your son thought this would help with the anxiety." The woman opened her eyes, and Minnie carefully placed the medallion in the palm of her hand. The last hour of the flight was one of the best experiences Minnie could have ever hoped for. She chatted with the old woman. She learned about the history of the pendant, how it was a treasured childhood item that brought comfort during storms. As they swapped stories back and forth, Minnie found that even in the midst of the turbulence of the plane and her looming job problems, she found a sense of calm in the woman's kind and sincere conversation. Minnie already knew that she would have to go home and give up her uniform. What she did not know was that some good deeds never go unnoticed. When the plane landed, her whole life changed, but not in the way she thought it would. As the other passengers shuffled toward the exit, Minnie was greeted by the old woman and her son, their faces beaming with gratitude. Minnie simply smiled in return. "My mother always taught me to never turn away from someone in need," Minnie said, her voice filled with a quiet strength. A knowing glance passed between the woman and her son. Then he turned to Minnie. His brow was furrowed in concern. "I couldn't help but come over here. Your boss mentioned letting you go." Minnie's heart sank. She nodded in surprise. The old woman giggled and placed her hand gently on Minnie's forearm. Minnie immediately noticed the sweet smile on the woman's face. As she spoke, Minnie, the old woman's eyes began to sparkle. My husband and I were discussing the other day who would like to join us on our new private jet. It's a lot smoother than those commercial flights, don't you think? She winked at Minnie, who couldn't help but chuckle at the memory of the recent turbulence. And since you seem to have some unexpected free time now, we were wondering if you'd like to come work for us. I feel that we have many more stories to tell, Minnie said. Minnie felt an overwhelming sense of relief and joy, like a child waking up on Christmas morning. But this time the gift was even better, a job where she could be herself and help others without fear or constantly looking over her shoulder. She said yes in a heartbeat, and she never had to deal with an angry boss again. There were still ups and downs in her life, but this time she had people to share them with. The old woman, Elsa, had made sure to tell her husband how much Minnie loved meeting new people after each flight. She had a day or two to walk around the city and talk to all kinds of people. She had escaped her fear of being alone. She was thousands of feet in the air. Instead, she had begun to love being on the ground as well as in the sky. Minnie's mother had always been right. Kindness was like a seed. You never knew what it would grow into. It may not always be the way you expect, but even small acts of kindness can blossom into something beautiful. Minnie had learned that the good you put out into the world has a funny way of finding its way back to you.